the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Allison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be with Drew Robinson. Drew, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Okay, I'm a transplanted New Englander, fresh from the Boston, Massachusetts area, now living in Central Florida. Work as a civil engineer, my glamorous day job, but I write because I love to have the creative release and write pretty much a pretty broad spectrum of stories, sci-fi, fantasy being the main ones, also little historical dramas, I like those, and children's books. And I've been very active with that in years and enjoyed immensely, and not only books, but I've also written screenplays, teleplays, and stage plays.
Wow. So you sound like you've been a very prolific writer.
Yeah. It's like when I get an idea in my head, it's like I got to put it down on paper or, well, figuratively speaking these days, get it out of my head into the computer is how it goes. And sometimes it's like as I'm writing the story, I'll realize this isn't enough of a story to be a book. Let's see, maybe a TV show, movie, who knows, And so then I'll modify depending on, what the medium I feel can best be suited for it.
So when did you start writing?
Well, the first start where it really began was back in college. Because actually back then I was a math major, so I had zero interest in writing. In fact, I pretty much hated English class, 2, 2, and 2, and there, and there. It's like, I don't care. I can't keep them straight. Just give me, integrated calculus like that I can handle, But actually in my junior year, I was over in Lakeland, Florida Southern College, and I like to help out at the theater department. Again, the creative side of me, I had to have a release. And I fell and struck the back of my head on the stage. I was helping to build a set. And at the time, it didn't bother me at all. We even joked, just hit my head, nothing vital, And a couple of weeks later, I started to get headaches, dizziness. I ended up in the hospital. It turned out I had a concussion. And this led to like massive headaches, dizziness, appetite loss, weight loss, and the big thing was memory loss, having real trouble concentrating, focusing. And mind you, like I said, I was a junior in college at the time, so I made studying very difficult. And the thing was that what was perhaps even more painful on the emotional level was the reaction of friends and family, because the thing was, I'm walking around looking perfectly normal. That's the problem with a brain injury. Unless you got your head all bandaged up, everyone's like, is always like, well, you look fine. What do you mean you got a headache? Your head would just, you said that to me 5 minutes ago. Why are you repeating yourself? I just told you that an hour ago. Why do you, all this? And it was very, very stressful. And so I started writing and just sat down. And of course, back then this was writing, not not computers, trying to get all these feelings of emotions out of me about the frustration I was feeling. And it eventually developed into a stage play. Because, as I say, I was working at the theater department. And the story of a college student, smart fellow who gets a head injury and is dealing with all of these stresses. And also, I went ahead and in the middle of the writing it, I got this inspiration. Add a character who breaks his wrist. So then here's this character who has a bodily appendage in a cast, so something visible. And then here's the other character, Alan, who looks fine. And it's like, the play's never been produced. I don't think I've ever even shown it to anyone. But it was quite the release, quite the cathartic experience in terms of getting these emotions out of me. And later that led to when, several years later, my brothers and we were forced to sell a cottage that we owned on Martha's Vineyard. It's the island that I spent my childhood on. We had inherited it from our father, but back in the recession of the early 90s, we were all struggling. We couldn't afford to keep it, And once again, the emotions of, the loss, the family, cottage and all that. And I worked that into a murder mystery of, this people being, trying to be forced to give up the family heritage type thing. And that actually turned out, became a book. I called it Murder on Gosnold Island. Set it on island, of course, like Martha's Vineyard. And that one, when I was done with it, I was like, geez, I'm pretty proud of this. And I actually tried to get it, to get some agents to look at it and what have you. And I've gotten kind of mixed reactions from some of them, but it's like, no, never took it on as a client. But that was what kicked it off. It's like after that, I just kept writing,
So, your journey into publication, how did that start?
Well, I was reading the Harry Potter books along with my daughter. And she, of course, like most kids, really enjoyed them. And I did too, but there were some weaknesses to them. I mean, a father of a daughter, it's like I was noticing, geez, you know what, that Hermione and the other girls, they don't seem very proactive. It's Harry and Ron who are forever saying, yeah, let's go out into the Forbidden Forest. Let's do this. Let's do that. And Hermione's, no, don't do that. And obey the rules. And I was like, geez, you know what? I wish it was a story where you had a girl who was the more proactively, and she at the time was also reading the Nancy Drew books. They're still popular. And I thought about something like that, but then I'm like, well, Nancy Drew, you think about it, girls read those, not boys. And I was thinking, what about a story where a girl is the main protagonist, but it would be something that boys could enjoy? And that's when I came up with the idea of a sci-fi story, because I figured, okay, if I do sci-fi, Star Wars, Star Trek type thing, the boys can have all the laser battles and the slimy monsters, and then the girls have the main character. And so I began creating this story, and I called it Lexa, because my daughter's name is Alexa, so named it after her, Lexa and the Gordian Maze of Terra. And the story, and I describe it as kind of Wizard of Oz crossed with Star Wars. Because here's this little girl going on this journey. All she wants to do is get home. And along the way, she picks up these various characters along with her, a supercomputer handheld. That's kind of the Tin Man character, And then this young woman who helps her. She's kind of the scarecrow / Cowardly Lion character, and goes on this epic journey. And that one I ended up getting actually published, a company out of Baltimore, Maryland called Amira Press. They published it, and the second book in the Lexa series. The second one was Lexa and the Smugglers of Cyclo. And I have outlines for a third and fourth book in the series, but unfortunately, Amira Press closed down. So stopped getting publishing. But those were my first two, and I was like, I certainly didn't ever had sales like Rowling, but still it was exciting to be able to say, yep, there it goes. I got these published. So that was my first. And then more recently, I've gotten two books published from a company called Champagne Book Group. Ronnie Hart, she's a member of FWA. She told me about them because they accept submittals directly from authors. Don't need an agent. And they published my time travel book, Worst Date, Greatest Adventure. If you're familiar with Outlander, if you know that series, it's kind of similar. A young couple goes back in time and get caught up in historical events. And that one is set on Martha's Vineyard. I even work in the actual historical events that took place on the island during the Revolutionary War into the story. And then the other one they're about to publish the second in that trilogy. And then the other book they published it's called Vampire Academia. And it's kind of a modern vampire story where the vampirism is a biological disease rather than some curse or something like that. And I always tell people it is not like Twilight. It is not a sappy love story. It's an action adventure story where this young girl, again, female leads, is kidnapped, and she's a vampire, and she has to be rescued, and she ends up rescuing herself. Bravo, that type of thing. So that was, kind of my foray into actually getting published.
And where do your ideas, how do they come to you? And then moving forward, do you like to work with an outline or stream of consciousness? What's your actual sit down and write process?
Well, an initial idea can come from a variety of things. I remember in one case, an image popped into my head of this young, again, girl, female lead, standing in a field, and the sun is bathing her face, and she smiles, and you see she has fangs. So I'm like, wait a minute, so she's a vampire out in the sunlight. Huh? What could I do with that? Well, that is now currently, I have an outline for a children's book called Sarah Bloodspurt, the Backwards Vampire. And I'm working on that one. In the case of like Worst Date, as I said, I saw the cable series for Outlander, and I enjoyed it, but I did the classic, that's pretty good, but I think I can do better. Because there were two items in the story. One was their time travel mechanism. I thought it was far too simple. It's like, wait a minute. She goes to the stone circle and she touches the stone. She goes back in time and that's it. That doesn't make sense. I later learned from people that have read the books, well, yeah, no, it's not that simple. Just for the cable series, they, dumbed it down, so to speak. So I'm like, oh, well, then I guess it's a good thing I didn't write the book, because that inspired me to come up with a better time travel mechanism. And then second was that in the series, one of the main gists of, I think it was like the second season, was that the main characters are trying to prevent the Jacobite rebellion. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea what they were talking about. I had to go online and look it up, but I found out, that was when the clans led by Bonnie Prince Charlie tried to rebel against the English, and they were all slaughtered. And so I'm like, so they're trying to interfere with a historical event, and we know they're going to fail. That's not very good. It's like you see these time travel movies where, we're going to stop the Kennedy assassination. We're going to stop this. And it's like, well, we kind of know you're going to fail, guys, because, you're picking on a major event that really can't be changed, So you go in knowing the ending, and it kind of takes away from it. So I was like, could I have this couple go back in time? And what happens if they do get involved in a historical event, but they do make some change to it? And that was kind of the start point. And that's very often where I'll start. My little kernel of an idea is, okay, this happening or that happening, or like I said, the vampire girl who likes the sun. And then I do start to build an outline generally. And I have several approaches I use. And in fact, I do a series of lectures on writing. And one of them is to talk about these different styles of coming up with an outline. And because sometimes like in the case of, I have a book, it's a collection of stories about Martha's Vineyard Island. Well, that started as just each one was its own little separate, like 500,000 word story. And when I got 20, 30 of them put together, I'm like, wow, okay, I can just, organize these and presto, it's a book, In the case of, like, for example, the story of how my parents met, it's my one nonfiction book, that I wrote as kind of in a screenplay format, because it was the simplest way to kind of organize all of the events. And then once I did that, I went in and said, well, okay, now I can expand, we can go beyond just saying, ruined city, geez, you gotta, for a book, you have to have a little more than that. But a lot of times I would always have some type of outline, but a lot of times while I'm writing, I will get that sudden inspiration, like say the kind of the stream of consciousness thing where I'm like, wait a minute, oh my God, I know exactly what to do here. And then I'm off, and 10 pages later, I realize, I just made a major change in my story. Okay, let's go back to the outline now. And we're gonna have to do a little reworking here to get this to fit, But outlines for me are always great. I guess that appeals to my engineering mind. You have things organized.
What about editing? Do you have an editing process?
Well, I try to. It can be difficult. It's the classic thing, trying to read your own writing. I mean, goodness, it still amazes me. I can read a sentence that I've written, and I 10 different times and not realize, geez, I misspelled my own name in it. So a lot of times what I'll do, fortunately, since I have so many ideas banging around in my head, what I'll often do is I'll work on, like, for example, the Sarah Bloodspurt, the vampire story, or I have this other one I came up with last summer. It's another one, a magical types, Lord of the Rings type of story. And I'll work on that. Just this afternoon, I was writing about 5-6 pages in that book, and I write it and I save it, put it aside, and then I'll go work on one of my other books. And a week later, I'll go back and reread what I wrote in that one, and that's when I'll catch some things like word usage. Oh, geez, I used the word "just" 7 times in this paragraph. I think I need to change a few of those. That's word usage. And of course, hey, that's the great thing about computers is I can do the find and replace and say, okay, look for the word "very" and change it so that it's highlighted in red. Go. And then it'll show me, oh my God, I used it 78 times. Boy, okay, we gotta use something else here, guys.
Yeah, those little pesky words that don't do anything but add bulk to our manuscript.
Yeah, well, hey, that's all. The other great thing about the computer, you right click and look at synonyms. Okay, rapidly, hastily. Let's say we'll find something else here.
Right. Yes. The handy dandy thesaurus, find and replace. Those are all wonderful tools for anybody wanting to write.
Yeah, my editor on the second time travel book gave me a list. Said you overuse the word dear, squeaked, slowly, sneered, and what? So if you could please go through and try and cut those down a little bit, we'd really appreciate it. So.
Yeah, I remember working with someone who liked to ask questions. Too many questions. It was maybe 1 or 2 fewer questions could help drive the plot a little faster. Mm-hmm. But it is wonderful when we can look at our work and know that with just a tweak or 2 we can make it perfect or close to perfect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that is the thing. As I say, trying to look for a synonym for slow. I say, okay, we gotta come up with something else here we can use. And I said that's where the online thesaurus, man. I gotta say that's been a boon to us writers these days.
It has. I do remember the old days where you had to pull out the dictionary and the thesaurus, and I became a spell check champion because I couldn't spell words, and so I would just replace them because I couldn't find them in the dictionary. So.
Yeah, but I still rely on spell check to warn me of some of these. Years ago I was editing some children's books for a client online. And it's like, oh my God, she was the worst speller in the world. I mean, I think she must have written by stream of consciousness because she never looked back. It's like a character's name would be spelled, 15 different ways. She couldn't spell didn't or don't. If anything with an apostrophe, the letters would be and the apostrophe would be, at a totally different location every time. So the computer would tell me. Normally, the computer tells you how it will underline misspelled words. The computer would tell me too many cannot highlight. It's like, my God.
Yeah, that's a flag.
Yeah, that's when you're overloading the system, my dear. My goodness.
Yes. Well, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, right now you said you have 2 projects that you're working on?
Well, let's see. There's the worst date. Let's see. It was Worst Date, Greatest Adventure was the first book. Worst Date, Greatest Challenge. That's the sequel. That's what I'm editing now for publication later. Hopefully later this year, maybe by summer we'll get that out. And then I have what I call Mystical Challenge. That's one of the books that I'm currently working on. And then the Sarah Bloodspurt, as I say, the children's book about the backwards vampire. Did a backwards vampire. I wrote a book called Heidi Haunt, the Living Zombie. And again, girl and screwing with the normal thing. Heidi lives with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Haunt, in Zombie Town, and she's alive. So of course she's an outcast. Oh my God, and That one I actually adapted for a streaming service. I also write for a comedy group called The Egos, and they do little skits that they put on YouTube and also on a streaming channel. And one of them, we did an adaptation of Heidi Haunt, where they did it about like a 15, 20-minute skit. And of course, given the limitations of the group, we couldn't have Heidi be a 10-year-old. She was, about 18, but still tried to preserve the story and of her, going to she has to go on this quest to become normal, and along the way she meets ghouls and she's afraid they're going to eat her, but she finds out, well, they're vegan, so she's okay. And then the vampires, she's afraid they're going to drink their blood, but they're like, oh, human blood? Oh, human? Oh, the triglycerides and the cholesterol? No, we don't touch humans, So, I always try to mess with the normal storyline. So that's one. Now that one is done, but I'm still looking for a publisher on that one. But yeah, Sarah Bloodspurt, and then the Mystical Challenge one is the two that I'm currently working on.
Well, it sounds like they are light and quirky.
Yeah. I do try and make that. I always try and infuse into my stories. I mean, especially when I'm doing a children's story, stuff that the adults will get if they're reading the books to their kids, funny little asides that they'll understand. I did one called Dragon Speak. Drew, the boy who talks to dragons, and a little boy named Drew, and he goes on an adventure into a mystical realm. And this one was inspired after I saw the movie Coraline, kind of the same thing. He crawls through a cave and in this mystical world, and he meets dragons and has this big adventure. But to get to the dragons, he encounters all these other beings, and along the way, it's like he's gets pulled into a submarine where he meets Captain Paul, who's in charge, and he has his two giant white mice who ride bicycles, the stationary bicycles. That's the engine, and their names are Peter and Mary. And Drew's like, which isn't it boring just sitting on the bicycles all the time? It's, well, yeah, but see, we compose folk music, and it's of course Peter, Paul, and Mary. But again, little kids, they're not going to get it. That's for the adults.
Love it. That's fun. Drew Robinson, how can people find out more about what you're working on, what you're up to, get in touch with you? Okay, well, I mean, they can certainly email me. And my email address is Doctor Who, and that's DRWHOAR, my initials, at hotmail.com. Also, there's a website I set up for the Orlando chapter of the FWA, because I run the chapter. And that's on, let's see, I guess that's on the Wix platform. My daughter actually told me about it. They allow you to set up a free web page there, because it's like trying to do be the leader of the FWA here. It's like, I'm kind of doing this on my own. I have no idea how to do this kind of stuff. I believe that the address of it is robinsonwriter.com, if I remember correctly. And so they can certainly go there, or I guess, if you go to the FWA website and just click on the link to the Orlando chapter, that should have information on me, and certainly anyone who's interested in attending meetings. We meet the third Tuesday of the month at the Winter Park Library, 6:30 to almost 9. And so you're welcome to come to that. I also had a critique group. So if anyone out there, is in the local areas, got some writing that they'd like some input on, hey, you're welcome to join us with that. And that's the second Tuesday. And you can email me. I can get you full information as to time and place and everything. Well, that's wonderful. Well, Drew, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions? Sure. Let's hear them. Fire away. Do you have a favorite artist? Love, you mean in terms of writing artist? Yes, Isaac Asimov. Definitely my favorite. If you're talking like a singing artist, well, geez, that's pretty broad. I mean, because although as my wife says, I like this. All you ever listen to are the screechy girl groups, Lady Gaga, the Heart, it's like she's more classic rock. So, although I do love the Beatles in terms of that respect. And then when it comes to artist of the artist medium, I'd say Da Vinci. Well, how about, do you have any collections?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got a good solid collection of Doctor Who stuff. As my email might, hint at it. I'm a very big fan of that. I got into it back in the '80s with Doctor Number 4, Tom Baker, and you never forget your first Doctor. So I've got a fair amount of that. And then, of course, I'm a Trekkie and Star Wars fan. So with Trek, I've got a few little items around here.
So I just have to ask, no one can see this in the background, but you have a Jaws poster back there. Is that from your days of living on Martha's Vineyard?
Well, yeah, when I was a kid, I mean, that summer, we were there when they made the movie. And although they filmed an awful lot of it in the early spring, so you may notice, like the beach scenes, how few people are actually in the water, because it was cold. It was really cold. I mean, we would get on the island in June and it was still cold. But what did we know? It was time to go to the beach, and we watched them film that. My sister-in-law, in fact, helped operate the Shark. She would turn the hoses for the pneumatics, because this was the '70s, technology, so no electronics or anything. It was, all pressure. And just give you a little secret on this: all those scenes with Quint on his boat, and Brody and Hooper, and they're supposed to be way out in the middle of the ocean, far from land. They were 100 yards off a state beach. We watched them go back and forth and back and forth. And then when the shark jumps up and sinks the boat, we watched that. The boat was between two barges, and they would sink into the water and then come back up and then sink into the water, and that day after day after day. And poor Roy Scheider had to just go up and down and get dried off and clean clothes, and up and down over and over.
Well, I love the secrets. I love those insiders information. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Well, Drew Robinson, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. If you ever have another opening, hey, come talk about some other stuff. Anyway, great talking to you, and good luck.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Allison Nissen. Allison out. Woo! We're all done. Drew Robinson is a transplanted New Englander. His first novel was Lexa and the Gordian Maze of Terra, a children's science fiction work. It led to Lexa and the Smugglers of Cyclo, both published by Amara Press. Many of his short stories are on Many of his short stories are found on grubstreet.ca. Dragonspeak, Drew, and the Boy Who Talked to Dragons, his first children's fantasy, was a finalist in the Royal Palm Literary Awards. He was regional director of Central Florida for he's an active member of the Florida Writers Association and currently leads the Orlando chapter. For more information about Drew Robinson, Orlando Writers Group homepage found on the Florida Writers Association's Writers Group page. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us at floridawriters.org. Until next time.